Hello and welcome to On Geopolitics, this podcast from the Centre for Geopolitics at the University of Cambridge, where we look at geopolitical issues in a historical context. Normally I'm here with Professor Ali Ansari, but today he's away. But that's not a problem because I'm joined by two fantastic replacements in the form of Dr. John Nielsen Wright, who is Associate Professor in Modern Japanese Studies at Cambridge and is head of the Japan and Koreas programme at the Centre for Geopolitics, and Alexandra Leonzini, who's a PhD candidate in the Faculty of Music here, and her research is on North Korean opera and the Cold War and the question of music and diplomacy. So welcome to you both. And I'm particularly excited about this because I'm trying to get more thinking going on about different intersections and that sort of complicated way that arts and culture relate to diplomacy and relate to geopolitics. And I'm going to start by playing a short clip of something which went viral on TikTok a couple of weeks ago. Alex, tell us what we've just heard.
Well, we've just heard a new song that's come out of North Korea. It came out mid-April on the occasion of the opening of 10,000 new apartments in Pyongyang. And it's the latest ode to Kim Jong-un. Now, it's become viral on TikTok for who knows what reason. In terms of North Korean songs, it's fairly standard of the genre. It's not very different to what they've been doing for the past 20 years or so. But this song in particular has gained traction on TikTok. A lot of American, in particular, TikTok creators writing about how subversive they feel listening to it in cafes in the middle of the US. And yeah, as a result, it's gained a bit of traction.
The difficulty for the Western audience, if you don't speak Korean, you don't know what it means. So
Yes.
What is it saying?
Well, it's a celebration of Kim Jong-un. It's referring to him as a friendly father figure in a way that actually we haven't really seen for Kim Jong-un until quite recently. The type of language being used to discuss him is what we would normally associate with his father, Kim Jong-il, and his father, Kim Il-sung. So there is somewhat of a departure in terms of the language that's being used to discuss Kim Jong-un within the song. However, the virality, shall we say, of this song is not because of the lyrics. The vast majority of people who are sharing it, who are commenting on it somewhat ironically, have no idea what this song is about. For them, it's a bit of a meme. And I don't know if, well, this is certainly not something one can assume that North Korea were aiming to create, but it has got a lot of people talking about North Korean popular culture for the first time in quite a long time, actually. And so, yeah, I'm quite excited about it.
And so for people who have just heard it but can't see it, I mean, one of the things it has a very jolly, bright, shiny, happy video with groups of construction workers or factory people dancing and singing in a way that's very redolent of the Soviet propaganda films.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Raving jolly, sort of happy North Korea. I wonder, I mean, so clearly the viral thing is partly ironic from a Western perspective. Or
yes. Yeah.
So, I'm just checking.
Well, it's hard to tell because my research is not on popular music, contemporary popular music, really. But I am quite active in quite a few online communities dedicated to North Korean pop music. And there is a very dedicated Discord server, for example, which is full of individuals who unironically love North Korean popular music. And it's a very global audience, people from all over the world. Some of them are, what we could perhaps generously call tankies. They are individuals who are very much taken with, the former communist past of the nations that they may have grown up in, a lot of people who romanticize, North Korea today. There are a lot of people who are part of these communities because they see it as an act of rebellion as well. So the TikTok virality is individuals who, are in the middle of a Starbucks feeling particularly rebellious because they're listening to a song about Kim Jong-un. But there are also a lot of people who unironically enjoy this type of music as well. So it is hard to distinguish sometimes between the two.
So, John, I'm going to bring you in here because I'm going to suggest that you're an expert in K-pop and you're going to explain how these two extraordinary bits of music diplomacy, I don't know what you call it really, but both Koreas are sending music into the world. Is there a cultural connectivity here?
Well, it's an interesting question, isn't it? Well, first, a declaration. I cannot claim to be a K-pop expert. My students, I think, would judge me harshly if I tried to position myself in that space. But I suppose, the obvious sort of notion is music that is manufactured with a specific purpose in mind, to promote a mood or a sense of the country, perhaps. We've all heard about the manufactured bands, K-pop bands in South Korea. Whether or not the North Korean government or the North Korean leadership sees this as an opportunity to go global, Alexandra, I'd be really interested to know whether you think this is going to have any impact back home, because, as you say, there's a lot of continuity in this style of music, and presumably it's normally directed at a domestic audience. Do you think the leadership is going to see this as an opportunity? Kim Jong-un is somebody who, unlike his father and his grandfather, has had all of these opportunities to kind of walk tall on the global stage. You think back to all of those key summit meetings in the past, that iconic meeting in Singapore with then President Trump, then the Hanoi summit, which didn't obviously result in very much in terms of bilateral relations. But this is a leader who's been glad handling other international leaders, Putin last year and others. Do you think we'll see this as an opportunity to burnish North Korea's credentials globally, if that's possible?
Yes-ish. In that, North Korea, Kim Jong-un has for the past many years told his people how beloved their cultural products are anyway, globally, whether they are or aren't. So, North Koreans themselves believe that their works of art are held in high esteem globally. So this shouldn't necessarily change anything. What we are seeing, or what we have seen, particularly over the past 5 years, is a change in how North Korea's light music ensembles. So this is what North Korea would refer to as a light music ensemble. Their light music ensembles have changed how they have performed outside of North Korea over the past 10 years in response to what we're seeing in terms of the development of K-pop in South Korea. So it's unlikely that this will lead to change in terms of how these ensembles perform for domestic audiences. But in terms of how they perform for foreign audiences, it is likely to change things. So a recent example of this that we've seen is in 2018, when there was a joint North and South Korean concert for the occasion of the Winter Olympics. The North Korean ensemble that performed wearing very, very short shorts and sequins, and danced in what for a North Korean audience would have been absolutely scandalously for what was a South Korean audience. And this was heavily influenced by K-pop, no doubt. But interestingly enough, the recording of that concert, because that concert was recorded for the North Korean audience, that part of the concert was taken out for the North Korean domestic audience. Even though it was something that the North Koreans had clearly put together for an international audience, it was still too risque for a domestic audience. So we're seeing quite a lot of tricks and, should I say tricks behind the curtain in terms of what is permitted. So what the public face of North Korea is versus what they're willing to actually show their own citizenry. And I suspect that a similar thing will happen with this TikTok virality.
That's really interesting. It suggests that the regime is pretty sophisticated in terms of tweaking its cultural products to meet the external opportunities.
Oh, very much so. Yeah. It's one of the things that frustrates me the most, actually, because I came into Korean studies from music. And one of the things that frustrates me the most is how few people seem to want to treat North Korea as a rational actor when it comes to their diplomatic action. They are very sophisticated, and, quite often people don't seem to give them the benefit of the doubt, shall we say, when it comes to just how they're willing to play.
And sophisticated and presumably pretty single-minded about the way art in general is used by the state to advance an agenda. Can you give us a sense of what it's like to be an artist, musician in North Korea? We hear all of these stories that Kim Il-sung invented musical notation for a North Korean public. Is that idle gossip, mythologizing, or is there some credence to this? And I'll give you one example. When I visited North Korea back in 2012, actually, I had the opportunity to go along to a concert. I was probably one of the few foreigners there. It was a set-piece audience with about 60 cellos on stage. So the emphasis was on grandeur and presentation. And most of the repertoire were the works of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il. And the entire audience was consumed with emotion. Consumed, I mean weeping publicly.
Yeah.
So in addition to this question of control, how is it received by ordinary North Koreans? Can we believe is actually a genuine expression of what people feel? And how much is performative if you're a Korean citizen?
So right from the foundation of North Korea as a state, there are discussions about music and what the national music of North Korea should be. It's one of the main reasons why it's the focus of my dissertation, because from the very foundation of the state, they're interested, for example, in the foundation of an opera house, which is a little bit incongruous because there was no opera in either Korea, really, before 1945. And yet it is understood from the very beginning that an opera house is needed for this new state that is emerging. Now, of course, there is influence from the Soviets in that regard. The Soviets prized music as a cultural tool, a tool of the revolution, very highly. And so this has very much been the understanding since the foundation of the state, that the creation of art for art's sake would not be permitted in this new state of North Korea, that all artistic production, so that's not just music, but visual arts as well, should serve the state. And this is articulated by, we're told it's articulated by Kim Jong-il in a book called On the Art of Opera, which is a series of speeches that is given in 1974, in which he essentially states that all artistic creation should adhere to what was known as seed theory, that all works of art, all songs should function in one way, and that would be to disseminate an ideological seed. So from the very beginning, you have multiple generations of North Koreans who have grown up in an environment where all artistic production serves the state in some way. And, in addition to educating them as to why they should feel a sense of gratitude to the party, these works of art, so if we look at the operas in particular, but also the popular songs, many of them relate to or recreate a sense of what it was like to live either in Korea when it was colonized by the Japanese, or they reconstruct essentially a sense of what it was like to live in Korea during the Korean War. And the purpose of these works is to create a sense of gratitude amongst people for the leadership. So yes, quite often when it comes to these pieces of music, the more epic cantatas that they have written, for example, they're almost re-traumatizing. People feel, they have they have really intense emotional responses because that is how they have been enculturated to receive these pieces. These pieces have been instilled to react in that emotional way to these works of art. And, for many people, it is one of the only acceptable expressions of emotion that they are allowed to express. So, yeah, it's almost like a volcanic eruption in a way. The last time I was in North Korea was 2017, and I was there for a month, during which North Korea successfully tested an intercontinental ballistic missile. And we were terrified because this was before Kim and Trump fell in love, so we didn't quite know what the American response to this was going to be. But I went to the opera the last day I was there. And what was very interesting to see was that images of this missile test were incorporated into the opera itself. And the entire audience were North Koreans or Zainichi Japanese. And as soon as they saw this, everybody at once stood on their feet, gave this a rousing applause, and people were weeping and crying because for them it represented, a hope, if this makes sense. It was very awkward for me and the two other researchers I was with at the time because we didn't quite know what the expected response for us was. But it was very much understood, that at the Opera House, while seeing this, while everybody was singing together, you had in that moment, what is known as unisonance, a concept coined by Benedict Anderson. When we're all singing together, we are part of one large imagined community. And they understood that the emotional response that was expected of them was to clap, was to cry, and was to thank the party, essentially, for protecting them from the existential threat.
That's fascinating. And it's sort of a novel perspective on Sturm und Drang, really, isn't it? It sort of begs the question, all of that continuity, all of that orchestrated generation of emotion, real or synthetic, whatever it might be, in a context where Kim Jong-un, he's relatively a young man, and he's shown himself to be something of a bit of a iconoclast in some respects. He's come out with this latest idea that he's going to tear up the unification policy of his grandfather. And we've actually seen monuments to unification and the idea of North and South being one country being physically removed. And that's a pretty radical step in a country where there have, after all, only been three leaders. And the dynastic continuity is something that is so hardwired into the political process that the state underscores. Do you think this combination of the past, as underscored by all of these musical references, and his style of leadership, breaking away from his grandfather and father and trying to sort of carve out space for himself, is sustainable? Is it going to work to keep the country together?
It's hard to tell because the change has been so abrupt, frankly. I mean, a lot of it is a response to, what's happening in South Korea and, is a response to the meeting, really, of Trump and Kim. The celebration of that meeting in North Korea made it quite difficult for, I think the propaganda and agitation department to continue saying that America was the big bad wolf, given that the meeting between Kim and Trump, even within North Korea, was portrayed very positively. So there's no real playbook for this. This is the thing that's quite interesting from my perspective, is that the North Korean playbook has been consistent for the past 70 years. It has not changed at all. And it's really in the past 2-3 years that we are seeing this change. And because of the difficulty in getting information as a result of the pandemic, the kind of ongoing issues when it comes to getting information out of North Korea, it is hard to know how this is going to play.
Can I ask a question? Because John, in his question, and I don't know which of you answers this, in his question, is this in response to what's happening in South Korea? And for our listeners, what is it, John, that made you say in response to what's happened in South Korea?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's two things, isn't it? We've had national elections in which the Conservative governing party of President Yoon did quite badly, opening the door to the Democratic Party, which has always been historically sympathetic to the idea of engagement with North Korea. President Yoon is, as president, someone who's taken a pretty tough line with North Korea. He's been really concerned about security risks from the North. We've seen all of those missile tests and this more belligerent language coming out of Pyongyang that Kim Jong-un has underscored. And this departure from unification has suggested that there is a kind of widening of the gap between the two Koreas. But with the Democrats now in a strong position and criticizing the government for its more aggressive posture, you might have expected Kim Jong-un to want to sort of soften things a little bit, right? To sort of think in terms of maybe more scope for accommodation.
So an idiot question here. If he's bulldozing monuments to, or aspirational monuments to reunification, saying it's obviously not a positive sign, but why is it not a positive sign? Because By doing that, what is he saying that his vision of the future is?
I can have a crack at that in terms of an answer. I mean, I would say for Kim, the biggest opportunity at the moment is the so-called new axis of authoritarianism. So a more independent North Korea, no longer tied to this idea of accommodation with South Korea, and particularly with the United States under President Biden taking a pretty tough position. For Kim, he can reach out, as he has done already, to Russia, with North Korea providing, of course, enormous amounts of munitions, missiles that have really materially assisted Moscow in its war in Ukraine, as well as closer ties with China. The Russian-North Korea part of the axis is now being really consolidated. We've seen the head of Russian intelligence visit Pyongyang recently. We've seen Russia providing considerable supplies of petroleum, which North Korea clearly needs to sustain its military posture. All of this means that there's a kind of natural logic, and authoritarianism is back, right? I mean, it's back in, Kim can celebrate it, whether through TikTok or through these public pronouncements. The hollowness of liberal democracy and bankrupt Western values means that it makes sense to double down on tradition, nostalgia, and all of those historical memes that, in a way, this music presumably reinforces. So that to me would be the logic behind this strategy. And I don't know, Alexandra, if you agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, yes. The other side of the coin, I think, for the longest time, North Korea's position has very much been that South Korea is a puppet of the US, that it is the other half of the North Korean arm, so they still have very much gone with the idea of, the Korean War was not a war of belligerence, but it was a liberating effort to liberate the South from the Americans. And that has been the message consistently. And when we look at North Korean rhetoric regarding unification, that has always been the position that they've taken. The South just waiting for the North to liberate them from the oppression of the US and from, the UN puppets who are, puppets of the US government. Of course, with this, friendly meeting with Trump, hard to argue again that they are the big bad, which means that, well, if South Korea is not acting as North Korea wish they were because, they're not being controlled by the US, well, then this means that the South is now irretrievable. It is now no longer salvageable. And in terms of music, a lot of music that North Korea produced in the 60s and the 70s, many of these songs were made to appeal to South Korean audiences. They were made to spread a message of a national whole, the idea of, Minjuk, the idea of the indivisible ethnic nation of the Korean people. And yeah, this is not something that we're seeing really anymore. Both North and South Korean youths, if you ask them, do you have much in common with the other half? I mean, South Koreans no longer see a kinship with the North Koreans. North Koreans no longer see a kinship with South Koreans. They are now two different nations. And so I do think that this is something that we are seeing expressed in the destruction of these monuments, the notion that, too much time has now passed for these two nations to come together.
How much of this do you think is also a distraction ploy on the part of the leadership? After all, we've had the impact of that in North Korea, impact of international sanctions, presumably the continuing dismal state of the North Korean economy. And, there's been a lot of speculation that Marshal Kim, this military figure, Kim Jong-un, we've seen a lot of footage of him inspecting troops, missile launches, talk of North Korea now enshrining in its constitution its nuclear policy, embracing a nuclear first use policy in response to even the hint, let alone the reality of a tactical challenge from South Korea or other actors in the region. It's very, very belligerent. And we've had some seasoned observers, I'm thinking of Bob Cullen, an American intelligence analyst of North Korea, saying just a few months ago that we are at a point of maximum danger. This is a situation which is unmatched, even compared to June of 1950, before the Korean War started, that North Korea is on the point of embracing a full-blown war strategy. When you look at the music and the artistic products coming out of North Korea, in contrast to the happy images that we saw in that very significant clip, how do you reconcile those two? I mean, where Where is North Korea headed?
Well, I mean, I think that, their rhetoric is very much, everybody join together, to defend the nation from the threat that is the other, no doubt. I mean, I agree with you that it is a distraction tactic, primarily because COVID was absolutely devastating for North Korea in terms of their economy, in terms of food scarcity primarily the lack of food, the lack of resources that were making their way into North Korea, the discussions that have been had about those individuals who might want to leave. I mean, Kim Jong-un has placed more men at the border to keep his citizens in than his father and grandfather ever had to do. So giving the nation a common enemy, having them band together in opposition to, a foe is an effective strategy. Kim Jong-il knew this. Kim Il-sung knew this, that if you would need a nation, if you need your people to come together, the best thing you can do is give them an enemy that they can collectively despise and that they can collectively sacrifice to defeat. And that is what the cultural products that are being produced are essentially instructing them to do.
So just to get back to Friendly Father, the thing at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so when you just watch the video, it doesn't appear to be getting people to bind together to defeat an enemy. It's showing that they're happy. But
yes.
Is there also stuff in the lyrics about defeating enemies?
No, the Friendly Father is, a response to the government giving the people something. So as I mentioned at the beginning, this song was written and released because 10,000 apartments were opened in a new district of Pyongyang. So we see songs released in North Korea to celebrate all sorts of achievements. They are very much a telegraph of domestic and international policy within North Korea. And so this song is a ode, to the generosity of the government. You have members of all walks of life in North Korea coming together to celebrate the generosity of the fatherly Marshal Kim Jong-un. So this is what this song specifically is about. Regarding the kind of posturing, the creation of this huge existential threat, as a binding agent, shall we say, that is happening. The reason why I'm kind of more skeptical about the idea that North Korea is more dangerous than it's ever been is because of just how much weaponry they're giving to Russia. A nation that's preparing for war is not giving away that much of their munition. The fact is, yes, North Korea needs petroleum. Without petroleum, they can't really do anything. But at the same time, were they truly marching towards war, I do not see them selling as much of their weapons to Russia as they currently are.
And that's, at a time of acute regional tensions, it's nice to have that little reminder that things could be a lot worse.
Oh, yeah. If they were stockpiling their weapons, I would say, yes, now is the time. We are leaving this particular region of the world and we are anchoring down in bunkers in the middle of Alice Springs.
Can I come back, though, to what you were saying? Because I think I agree with you that there is a kind of consistency with both sort of highlighting the importance of collective military preparation and strengthening the army. North Korea, of course, has long pursued this so-called Byungjin line, this parallel line of focusing on both military preparedness, scientific progress, and economic prosperity. And Kim Jong-un, since taking over in 2012, has stressed that pretty consistently. But then it does raise the question, if he's still wedded, as I think he increasingly has to be, in order to bolster his legitimacy at home, to delivering economic prosperity, then it opens a crack, if you like, a sort of point of vulnerability for this regime, as was the case for his father. If you reform, however you define reform economically, and create more economic opportunities, you inevitably lose a bit of control over your own citizens. Mm-hmm. And we've heard reports, particularly as ties between China and North Korea have improved, of the so-called, if you like, Pyongyang middle classes, the economic elites who have access to, maybe illegally, but nonetheless do have access to K-pop and South Korean drama and news of the outside world. To what extent will that chip away at this effort by the state to craft a uniform narrative?
I mean, it definitely can. From my experience, in terms of those who I've met from this, shall we say, emerging middle class, most of them are individuals from families who have strong ties with the Kim family anyway. So they are the, children of diplomats. They are the children of those who are within the inner circle anyway. And, there is no secret that the privileged few who live in Pyongyang do have access to resources and materials that the vast majority do not. The fact is, though, that they remain a minority. And they are a minority of people who recognize, at this point at least, that they have far more to gain in the current status quo than they have, in terms of overthrowing it. I have had the opportunity to interview quite a few people, defectors, North Koreans who now live in South Korea, many of whom are from this kind of former group. And a few of them have regrets because they went from a situation of relative financial stability, social stability. They didn't have perhaps the freedoms that they have in South Korea, but they also had networks that they could rely on, and they have left and gone to South Korea and are now finding themselves entirely isolated and ill-equipped, shall we say, to navigate the new system in which they're a part. So, yeah, it's interesting to get to know people who either are or have been in that situation because, I've spoken to some analysts who see North Korea now where kind of the Soviet state was in the late 1980s with, these middlemen, shall we say, who are increasingly enriching themselves. And I think the regional instability of North Korea that they find themselves in means that they're not going to be able to develop the same type of nest egg, shall we say, that those Soviet oligarchs were able to do. There's still not enough power. Like, power is still concentrated too much within the hands of the Kim family.
It kind of prompts a question to Suzanne, actually.
I don't answer the questions. I don't know anything about Korea.
No, but you are someone who knows a great deal about cybersecurity, right?
Mm.
Or at least, the way in which states use technical assets. I mean, one of the interesting things that a lot of us are speculating now is with improved ties between China and North Korea, to what extent can North Korea, this is really a question to you both, to what extent can North Korea turn to China for access to surveillance technology to keep its thumb, if you like, on the neck of public opinion? Have we seen any evidence to suggest that between Beijing and Pyongyang, there's greater interest in doing this as a means of ensuring that the state can monitor, that the state, there is an intranet in North Korea, there is mobile phone technology, originally, I think, sourced from Egypt. How sophisticated is North Korea in its approach of using surveillance and intelligence and these new mechanisms of authoritarian, if not totalitarian control to keep its domestic public in check?
I don't know the answer. Alex, do you know the answer?
I think that there is already an internal passport system within North Korea, for example. So, it is very much like there is no freedom of movement between districts already. So there is already quite a significant amount of control on citizenry in terms of where they can move and what they have access to. In terms of the phones, yes, the internet system is heavily monitored. There's very limited access to the internet proper, external materials. And even then, North Korea has been very good at training individuals to, they're weaponizing their citizenry really to try and gain as much as they possibly can in terms of Bitcoin and the like, these cyber currencies. In terms of China's influence, I think what China wants is stability in the region. That's really all they want. So there's only so far that they, I think, are willing to entertain Kim Jong-un in that regard. They do have relations with North Korea, extradition arrangements. So if North Koreans are found to have left North Korea via China. If North Korean citizens are found within certain regions, they will be sent straight back to North Korea. So there is some assistance from the Chinese government in terms of maintaining that status quo. But I don't think the technology in terms of, I don't think there's really any need for North Korea at this point to control its citizens via them.
It's a really interesting question, John, because it would be nice to know the answer, which I don't. The extent to which, when we've seen all over the rest of the world, the proliferation of technology that, and the kind of shorthand of smart cities, with technology which enables states to monitor the movements and behaviors of their citizens in all sorts of different ways. And we have that in benign European states. We have it in London, and not Chinese technology, but so it must be very tempting. But I suppose every state has to then work out how much information they're giving about themselves back to the Chinese. And I simply don't know what that calculation would be in North Korea.
And I think, in North Korea, if nothing else, as a result of its historical experience, as a state since the 1940s, since 1946, is hyper-conscious of the importance of remaining nominally at least autonomous, not compromising its discretion and its sovereignty. And we shouldn't forget, that the North Korean state back in the 50s and 60s was seeking to develop its nuclear weaponry. And it was Russia and China that stood in the way of that. They sought to restrict North Korea's freedom of movement. So I think it's a good point, Suzanne, that they would be conscious, I think, of their vulnerability. But I think it's, to come back to this question of control, if the technological route is problematic for the reasons we've just sort of alluded to, then it brings us back to this kind of performative dimension. Honek Kwong, my colleague here in Cambridge, who's an anthropologist who works on Korea, has talked about North Korea as the quintessential theatre state. And that seems to be illustrated through its use of music. There's another performative dimension, which is the question of continuity. And there's been a lot of speculation about the role of Kim's daughter, Kim Ji-ae, who is just 11 years old. She and her dad were seen recently inspecting a street in Pyongyang. I don't know whether it was the same construction of residential accommodation, but it's forced a lot of us to ask this question: what's he doing by identifying someone as young as her, and in light of her gender? What does this tell us about his confidence in the dynastic durability of the regime? After all, he's a man who doesn't look as if he's in the peak of health, let me put it that way. And there are always swan moments which could come along and radically change what we might expect from the internal politics of North Korea. So, Alexandra, if you can give us your speculation on what this all means, it would be really useful, I think, for our listeners.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think a few of us who do pay attention to North Korean music have been listening for a song. Because, Kim Jong-un's own succession was confirmed with a song called Footsteps. And so from my perspective, it's not a done deal until she has her own song, frankly. Something that the masses can sing with pride. But yeah, the fact that she is so young, I think there's a few reasons why he's highlighted her. In particular, the attention that his sister was getting quite a few years ago, I think might have been a bit of a threat, perhaps. I think, I wouldn't be surprised if that was seen as a potential issue in terms of his line of succession, given that the people of North Korea themselves, the fact that she is a woman, I don't see as an issue in terms of North Korea's, in terms of their domestic politics. They have been used to, lionizing the mother of Korea since the 1960s. So a woman being in charge is not necessarily counter to expectations, I think, within Pyongyang. What will be interesting to see is, as she grows older, how she potentially models herself. Kim Jong-un himself is still very much sporting a, 1950s Kim Il-sung look, doing his best through his haircut, through his dress to, again, remind those of, the glorious past. And
sorry to interrupt, that hasn't broken through internationally yet in the
oh,
same way.
really?
Well, I'm just wondering whether is there a vogue internationally for Kim Jong-un haircuts or Kim Jong-un?
Not for the Kim Jong-un haircut. And I mean, not in the same way that the boiler suit hit. Like Kim Jong-il's boiler suit was iconic. The haircut hasn't made its way quite in the same way. But I mean, it was the first thing that I noticed when I first visited the Glorious Fatherland Liberation War Museum, which is the Pyongyang museum dedicated to the Korean War. There is a giant statue of Kim Il-sung in his general's outfit in the foyer. And I thought it was Kim Jong-un. I was so shocked because it's a spitting image. And within Pyongyang, everybody will ask you, oh, isn't our leader handsome? Isn't he so handsome? He's very handsome, isn't he? And you just say, yes, he's very handsome. But it's an active appeal for him to do so. So it'll be interesting to see how his daughter models herself. I wouldn't be surprised if she begins wearing, like a Pioneers Army uniform from the 1940s, starts wearing her hair in the 1940s style as well. Yes, but we're waiting for the song. The song will confirm whether she is the next leader or not.
I'm going to draw this to a close, but to say thank you to both of you. Actually, it's fascinating, and it's confirmed me in my already strongly held belief that in order to understand a place, you have to go there and you have to talk to people and you have to really understand all the different things that influence them, not just, who's firing rockets at who, but what they're thinking. And I think that overlap between motivation and emotion and how art and culture can do that is a really important thing for us to consider. So it's felt like, to me, just sitting here, it's felt like a wonderful window into a world that's normally closed to us. And I want to thank you very much for opening it a little and letting us in. It's been brilliant. And we'll all be watching now for signs of young North Korean women and setting new fashion trends, which they could do. So thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.